Comey on that issue.
But a fair amount of reaction coming in on that, including from Senator Chuck Schumer about this, saying that President Trump now needs to retract this claim immediately.
That's right. I mean, the Democrats are up in arms. I think one of the most controversial statements came right up the front in the opening of the hearing from the leading Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes. He said that there was no physical evidence of, or rather no evidence of physical wiretapping. But he then went on to say that doesn't mean that you can't rule out other forms of surveillance, which has really set a cat among suggesting that the UK had been somehow collaborating with the Obama administration and the intelligence agencies here to spy on Donald Trump. That claim was absolutely rejected. So the fact that somebody like Devin Nunes, who's meant to be investigating, is leaving the door open for suggestions that there were other forms of surveillance has really caused outrage.
Thank you very much for your time and for the analysis. That's our Washington correspondent, Nina Maria Potts, at 21 minutes past 7.
In Wellington, it's slow again traffic-wise on State Highway 2 this morning. Another breakdown at Horokiwi. This is where the truck breakdown was yesterday. The car was blocking the right-hand lane heading city-bound, but is now being cleared off the lanes. Drivers, though, should expect some delays there. Also, queues for the Terrace Tunnel are back to the Hill Street overbridge this morning, so expect delays there as well. And in the Waikato this morning, there are reports of a truck crash on State Highway 3 south of Piopio, just south of Te Kuiti. Drivers are being told to follow the directions of emergency services there. So that's a truck crash on State Highway 3 south of Piopio this morning. 22 past 7 now. Australian community housing providers are eyeing up one of the country's largest social housing projects in East Auckland, which has come on the market just 1 year after it was set up. Tamaki Redevelopment Company is selling its tenancy arm, Tamaki Housing Association, which manages nearly 3,000 homes. The homes themselves will still be owned by the Tamaki Redevelopment Company. Local housing providers say they want it, but they worry they could miss out to a large overseas operator. And as Sharon Brett Kelly reports, tenants will have no say on whether their landlord is local or foreign.
Tamaki Housing Association took over 2,800 Housing NZ properties last March, but the tenancy management service is already on the market. Its owner, Tamaki Redevelopment Company, jointly owned by Auckland Council and the government, is calling for expressions of interest. The chief executive, John Holyoake, says there's nothing to stop overseas operators pitching.
The landlord that we're talking about remains the Tamaki Housing Association. What we're looking for is governance and leadership from an organisation to come in and support that. A number of the overseas community housing providers have already been involved in similar processes in Auckland and Tauranga. They haven't been successful to date, but there's nothing precluding them from registering their interest and going through the process.
The head of Canberra-based community housing network Power Housing Australia says some of its members are keen. Nicholas Proud says he has been talking to the New Zealand government about taking over state housing for several years and had meetings here 3 weeks ago.
They would look to invest there to grow a business there in conjunction with a partner or partners if that was determined to be something that they wanted to pursue.
Mr Proud says making a profit is not the motivation for Australian providers.
Such a small scale, it wouldn't be a significant profit that would be considered. That wouldn't be the motivation for going across there. The motivation for going across there would be to work with the sector to grow the sector.
Local housing providers say they should run it and ensure any profits are reinvested here. James Widgery is the chairman of Auckland Community Housing Association.
I think as New Zealanders we know our people really well, and I guess my preference would be wherever possible that we continue to support our own, where we can deliver as well as anyone globally. And I think we've proved ourselves with some very successful models here in the community housing sector.
The head of community housing Aotearoa, Scott Figgenshow, opposes the sale.
Wouldn't it be better to put that same effort into all of the growing additional supply rather than trying to repackage this currently reasonably well operating entity.
Mr Figgenshow says tenants should have a say about who is their next landlord, but John Holyoake of Tamaki Redevelopment Company says that won't happen. He says the shareholders, the government and Auckland Council, always plan to sell the tenancy arm to grow the community housing sector.
It grows those individual organisations that aren't controlled by the Crown.
In New Zealand.
Yeah, it puts control into another organisation.
Which could be either New Zealand organisation or an Australian or UK organisation.
That's right.
So it's not necessarily growing the community housing sector in New Zealand.
It's growing how many people are independently responsible for social housing in New Zealand.
Expressions of interest close on April the 6th, and the Tamaki Housing Association is likely to be transferred to the new owner in about 12 months. Mō te hōtaka o te ata ko Sharon Brett Kelly aho.
26 minutes past 7. Northland's Mayor John Carter wants his council, rather than Wellington bureaucrats, to take control of Kaikohe's future. Weeks of crime and chaos in the town reached boiling point on Friday night when half a dozen children walked into a liquor store and stole boxes of beer. Later, a group of youngsters were captured on CCTV hurling rocks and trying to kick in the glass doors of the mobile service station. John Carter says something has to be done.
We have bred a subculture of people who now don't live and know our society. They live outside it. What you saw over the weekend was a glimpse of what it's going to be as we move forward if we don't address this issue. We need to be able to be in a position to make the decisions. It is quite honestly, we're at breaking point, actually. And if people think we've got a housing crisis, you wait until this stuff starts breaking out over the next 5 and 10 years.
Let's talk now to Mark Anderson. He's the chair of the Kaikohe Business Association. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
Do you agree with those statements from John Carter?
Yeah, we certainly have a problem, but it's been a 30-year slide to get to the point we're at now. So it's a big boat to turn around, but I would agree wholeheartedly that instead of programs being driven out of Wellington, it would be better to see them driven at a local level for sure.
What would that mean to you?
Well, I guess if you look at the police resourcing for a start, I mean, we have the highest need here in Northland, so I'd like to think that we could attract more police here. That's just on the policing front, but at an educational level, which I think schools have the potential to be a real circuit breaker, the people who are schooling the kids up here know what's best for the kids up here that will make the difference up here. So the Ministry of Education can be a bit of an unwieldy beast, so we need the ability to act locally with the resources up here.
What sort of engagement, if any, does your business association have with some of the people who are causing these troubles? I mean, do you guys get in there and sponsor events, or is there money going towards trying to have programs and things for these kids to do?
No, we have a distinct lack of resource in that regard. The Business Association in Kaikohe is business owners, but there's a strong presence from residents as well. It's a fairly small organisation, to be frank, and we're pretty under-resourced.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
We have limited means.
I'm not saying that this question line isn't to suggest that you single-handedly go out there and solve the problem. I'm just wondering, does there need to be a town meeting? Do you need to talk to each other? Because, I mean, the kids and the parents themselves, I mean, do people actually need to get together and have a yarn about some of this stuff?
Oh, well, there've been, in the last 18 months, I think there've been 3 town meetings, 2 around the crime and wider issues around that, and 1 that I held, which was just an information evening as chair of the Business Association about some of the stuff that's going on. Look, I think there comes a point where stuff actually has to happen, and that has to come from being adequately resourced. There's something like 40 social providers or of some sort within the town, and it seems like there's the ability for them to end up being like ships passing in the night a bit. So, I don't think more meetings are necessarily going to make a big difference.
Okay, so what would?
Well, I honestly think that the schools have a really big part to play. they have the potential to be a circuit breaker, but from a very young age. And for them to do that adequately, we need to, we've got a high school that has been completely old and rebuilt. I mean, how many high schools have you heard around the country that have got to the point of disrepair so badly that the whole thing has had to be bowled and started again? And that's just really indicative of how things had got. So working backwards from there, that's the high school. Well, we need to ensure that the primary schools and the kindergartens are adequately resourced all the way through, so that they are places that kids want to be, and that they truly become the centre and the focal point of the community.
I was looking back this morning and I found a story from 2012, which could have been, I had to check the date because it looked like it was 2017. So,
Yep.
We had a 14-year-old in this story committing all sorts of burglaries. We had locals saying that, it reached a tipping point. The Kaikohe Business Association also quoted in this story. So that's 5 years back. I mean, is it time for some sort of special task force? I know you don't want bureaucrats so-called in Wellington doing it, but does it need some government funding to actually try to get to find out exactly what these problems are and to put some resources in, because it does sound like it's been an intractable problem?
Well, I think the problems are largely known by the people who work in the social sector, and a lot of it comes down to funding. So a lot of these kids need to be intensively managed, like a mentoring type scenario, I imagine. Well, that doesn't come cheap, and you've got to have people to do it. So I think talk is cheap. It's easy to keep talking about it. We actually need the funds to come back to a local level to allow locals to follow up with these kids and stay on their tail and mentor them and make sure they're at school and attend sport. Transport's a big problem for getting kids to do a lot of things.
Yeah. Just quickly, because we are running out of time here, Mark, do you know some of the parents? You must do in a small town. I mean, are they just turning a blind eye to this stuff, or?
Well, I don't know the parents, but I don't think they get the response. I don't think they give the response that we'd like to think they'd give when they're confronted with the problems their kids have created.
Hey, thanks so much for your time, Mark. Really do appreciate that. Mark Anderson, he's the chair of the Kaikohe Business Association. 27 to 8 now.
And just while that interview was going on, this has come in on the text. Someone saying, Northland College is doing an amazing job and no amount of good teaching can overcome poor parenting. This problem is societal, not educational. Do keep your feedback coming into us. 2101 on the text, facebook.com/NZ Morning Report. Also on Twitter at NZ Morning Report, and the email morningreport@radionz.co.nz. And coming up before 8 o'clock, we'll be speaking to Andrew Little about putting a price on water. We'll also be looking at the latest ideas about the future of university study. And Norway wins the title of being the happiest place on earth. We'll be crossing to the happy country. The headlines first, though, and Nicola Wright.
Child, Youth and Family has apologised for misleading the family court and putting a 3-year-old girl at further risk. Judge Anthony Walsh ruled the agency's reports that a man had a history of violence against women were wrong and delayed the father being allowed custody of his daughter. The FBI's Director James Comey says an inquiry is underway into any links between US President Donald Trump's campaign and Russia. But he's told the congressional committee there is no evidence to support Mr. Trump's claim that former President Barack Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. Mr. Trump's spokesperson Sean Spicer says there's no evidence of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. A Northland mayor says a crime spree at the weekend in Kaikohe by out-of-control teenagers is a glimpse of the future if something isn't done. On Friday night, a group of young people stole boxes of beer from a liquor store and tried to kick in the doors of a service station. The Far North Mayor John Carter says government policies over decades have bred a subculture of young people who live outside society. Opposition parties are accusing the Prime Minister Bill English of passing the buck on the question of taxing water. The government yesterday asked its Special Advisory Group on Water to investigate what it calls the hugely complicated issue of water exports. The Productivity Commission wants big changes to tertiary education funding and monitoring to help institutions introduce new ways of teaching. A report by the Commission says government rules are stifling innovation. The report says the government should start charging interest on new student loans. Microsoft founder Bill Gates has again topped Forbes' list of the world's richest people. in a year when the number of billionaires rose 13% to 2,043. Mr Gates is now worth $122 billion. The investor Warren Buffett came second on $107 billion. Donald Trump slipped 220 points to 544th on the list. He's worth just $5 billion. That's the news. Today's weather with Met Service. Kaitaia is mostly cloudy. There's the chance of a morning shower and a high of 22 degrees. Whangarei, mostly cloudy and 22. Auckland starts cloudy, then fine at times, 22. Hamilton cloudy at first, then fine at times, 23. Tauranga fine from afternoon, 26. Whakatane sunny and 25. Rotorua just some morning cloud, 23. Gisborne fine, 23. Napier and Hastings blue skies and 24. Taupo and Taumarunui mainly fine, but the chance of a morning shower, 23 the high for Taupo, 24 for Taumarunui. New Plymouth morning and evening cloud, 23. Whanganui, Palmerston North and Levin morning cloud clears, but it's overcast from evening, 23. Masterton cloud at times till afternoon, then fine, 22. Kapiti cloud this morning clearing, overcast from evening, a high of 21. Wellington fine apart from morning evening cloud, 20. Blenheim cloudy and 21. Nelson cloud at times, 22. Westport a few showers, rain from afternoon, 20 degrees. Greymouth and Hokitika light rain and 20. Kaikoura patchy drizzle and 18. Christchurch, Ashburton, Timaru and Oamaru cloudy with the chance of light rain. Christchurch and Timaru have highs of 16, Ashburton and Oamaru 15. Wanaka cloudy at times, might get a shower this morning, 21. Queenstown cloudy spells, possible morning shower and 20. Alexandra fine breaks this afternoon, 18. Dunedin a morning shower and the chance of drizzle in the afternoon, a high of 16. Invercargill cloudy at times and the odd shower till afternoon, 14 degrees today. It's 23 minutes to 8.
And you're listening to Morning Report. Well, the government's being accused of passing the buck by asking a specialist group to look into the idea of taxing water. Opposition parties say a similar government group has already looked at the matter. It came up empty, and it won't be any different this time. Let's talk about this further with the Labour leader, Andrew Little. He's in the Wellington studio. Good morning.
Good morning, Susan.
So do you not support this government move on looking into water bottling and export?
Well, it's just another example of this government kicking the can down the road. They've done it with other issues too. You look at the multinational tax. We've got a paper, but no decisions will be taken until after the election. We've seen it with superannuation. Come up with an idea, but nothing's going to happen until after the election. Now with water, last week you had Nick Smith saying this is such a silly idea, it would never be considered. Now you've got Bill English saying, yeah, we're going to give it to this committee to have a look at, but nothing will happen until after the election. This is a real issue now. New Zealanders are concerned about it now.
It is slightly different, though, to the superannuation question, because it's been laid out exactly what the government would do should they get a fourth term. This one, surely, isn't it fair enough that a long look is taken and that a proper decision is made? Except then that
the Land and Water Forum, that the issue is now being referred to, has looked at the issue of water and water allocation already. Actually, the Land and Water Forum has started falling apart. You've got parties now walking out of it because it's just not getting anywhere. And so quite what the Prime Minister hopes to achieve by referring this issue to them at this point, I'm not quite sure that can't be achieved through, the government actually just considering the issue itself now.
All right. What would Labour do?
We would have a look. We would have a very close look at the, for the water bottling companies using pristine water. They should be paying some form of levy. We think it should go to the regional council, whoever it is that deals with water consents and water management in the particular area. There is a case.
Isn't that the current case, though, that this is essentially something that's dealt with by the councils? You just leave it in their hands.
But you'd give them, then you'd make sure that they've got the power to levy appropriately a resource rental effectively on that water use. And
what would an appropriate cost be?
Well, that's a matter for them to consider. If you're considering levying on water use for this particular purpose, it's still got to be, and giving it to the business who's going to put it in a bottle and charge a premium and make money out of it.
But how many cents a litre would be?
It still has to be at a competitive commercial sort of level.
What would be appropriate?
Well, I don't listen. I'm not an expert and a specialist in this area, but I think most people would say it is fair that if you're coming here, taking this water untreated, untouched, putting it in a bottle, charging a premium and sending it overseas, then fairness dictates that you should contribute something back, whether the funds get used for cleaning up other waterways or whether it gets used for other regional council sort of expenditure, then that's the fair thing for it to do.
Isn't just this another way, though, to pass the buck? It's a different way to, in your words, pass the buck that Bill English is doing, but that's just what you're doing. You're saying, oh, no, we'd put it back on the councils.
No, I think, well, the council is responsible for administering it. In terms of setting a charge, an appropriate charge.
So this shouldn't be a central government issue?
Well, I think you can involve Treasury and other sort of experts in resource allocation decisions to say what is appropriate. It's got to be something that leaves the end user commercially viable still. It's not about, no pun intended, but soaking the end user. It's got to be something that means that there's a fair contribution paid for their resource use and that the end user is commercially viable.
Okay, so you wouldn't want to see a blanket charge that New Zealand water from wherever costs 10 cents a litre, for example?
No, and I don't. Look, the 10 cents a litre issue is a figure that Nick Smith came up with because he misunderstood what was suggested by somebody else about resource rental. So, for example, if you're using aggregate or you're a quarry mining aggregate, you pay 10 cents a cubic metre. Which is a lot different to, in water's case, 10 cents a litre. Put that aside. The point is that you can make rules that are fair. So you might say water use for human consumption, for livestock consumption, no charge, not justified. Water that is not, sort of pristine, pure water that the water bottling companies are taking, but is a different quality water, you might have a different charge for that. But in the end, you want to have a contribution for the resource use. That means that the end user is competitive and commercially viable.
Why would you want to leave this as such an interesting, such a big issue that affects so many people in the hands of councils, when some would say that perhaps councils haven't done the greatest job when dealing with exactly this kind of issue? I suppose I'm thinking about flip-flops around fluoridation and that sort of thing. Yeah,
that's gone from district councils, and now it's gone to DHBs, and I think there is a legitimate question about where the decision for that should lie. The reality is it is regional councils who are managing water resources and making allocation decisions now. They are the ones issuing the consents. They are the ones in touch with that issue. They are the ones who can monitor water flows and water use. They've got the setup now to manage that and deal with it. They should be the ones left to deal with it now.
Do you think this is a difficult issue to handle?
It's not easy because there is complexity to it, but it's not an impossible or insurmountable issue, and it's one we have to deal with as a matter of fairness. We have to deal with it.
But David Parker seems to say that this could be done virtually straight away. The quote is, you could do it really quickly. We already charge royalties on oil, on gas, on coal, even when gravel is extracted. You just apply, extend that principle to water.
Yeah, so
why not just do it?
So you want to work out a regime to do it, and that's why I said that regional councils administer it. You might want to involve Treasury and other central government departments in setting up the regime and setting striking a rate for it for sure. So it can be done, but there will be other issues. There will be the issue of Māori rights in it, and that's you don't have to get into the issue about who owns water, but if there's a resource rental being applied to water in the way that, for example, 25 years ago applied to fisheries, then Māori will have a claim about it, and we're going to have to deal with that as well.
Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming into the studio. The Labour leader, Andrew Little, there. It's 17 minutes to 8.
The government is spending twice as much on new student loans, although the government has ruled that one out. It says it is open to the other recommendations. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.